Welcome to today's video entitled The Fall of Babylon. Please stay until the end because you will learn when those special 3 hours of the fall will be. And they are coming sooner than most suppose. Are you prepared? As always, without the now 4 videos in the current video category, the finished mystery, the 7th trumpet begins to sound, you are missing the foundation for today's video. Here you see our newest video with the title, The Midnight Cry. In this video, we give a rough overview from the time around August 19 up to the first resurrection and general ascension in December 2025. A core theme of this video is the parable of Matthew 25 and when the event of the midnight cry can be expected. In today's video, we fill in this time frame and try to place the text of Revelation 18, where the fall of Babylon is mentioned, and the 7th plague correctly. As an introduction, I briefly show this original slide from the previous video. It shows the 4 positions of sun and moon conjunctions in the 70th Jubilee year, which has begun here. Remember the silence in heaven, since 3-eye Atlas appeared and showed us that Jesus has finished his high priestly ministry in the heavenly sanctuary and is on his way to earth as king. Therefore, the third heaven is empty and silent for about half an hour. When does this silence end? As a reminder, I also show this original slide again. You remember that we have here December 19, when 3-eye Atlas is closest to Earth. And we've worked out in detail how the cornerstone laying day and the feast of Hanukkah up to December 21 serve for the days of the first resurrection and the ascension. Whoever has not yet seen the video, The Midnight Cry, should really catch up on it. Now, let's come to today's topic. In the months ahead of us until December, we now know some key dates. June 25, September 21, and December 19 from the previous video or from the slide shown earlier. This is how the continued timeline from June 25 must look when we project it onto the Maseroth and follow the path of the sun, that is, the bridegroom, which has come out of his tent. Here is the blood moon of September 7, which I already presented in the last video. After that, one must expect dramatic events on this earth. Here I have also marked the time of the midnight cry, when all virgins should finally have woken up. And here in December, you see the already known Hanukkah feast, when we may expect the ascension. Now, it so happens that in these days ahead of us, the Jewish autumn feasts also take place, which we must always keep an eye on. Here is the table for the 7th month, Tishri. And we also consider the feasts of the second possibility, because the religious Jewish year begins in spring with the sighting of the first visible crescent moon after the spring equinox. And that only
denn
if
genug
enough ripe
reife
barley
Gerste
had been found,
gefunden wurde,
so that the
damit man
wave
die
sheaf could
Hebegabe
be
am
offered
zweiten
on the
Tag der
second day of
ungesäuerten Brote
unleavened bread
im
in
ersten
the
Monat
first
Nissan
month,
feiern
Nisan.
konnte. Und
And
sollte
should the
die
barley
Gerste
not
noch
have been
nicht
ripe
reif genug
enough,
gewesen sein, dann
then
wurde
a
ein
13th
13.
month,
Monat
Adar
Adar
2,
2
was
eingeführt und der
introduced,
Jahresbeginn
and
um
the
einen
beginning of
Monat
the year
verschoben.
postponed by 1
Deshalb
month.
betrachten wir
Therefore,
immer
we always
beide
consider both feast
Festtagsmöglichkeiten
possibilities,
und daher zeige
and
ich
so
hier
I
auch
also
die
show
Tabelle
here the
für den
table for the 8th
8.
month,
Monat
Cheshvan.
Cheshvan. Der
The
erste
first feast
Festtag
day
der
of the
ersten
first
Möglichkeit
possibility
ist
is the
das
Feast of
Posaunenfest
Trumpets,
hier am
here on September
24.
24.
Das ist
That's
der
the
erste
first of Tishri,
hier mit
shown here
T1
as
dargestellt.
T1.
Dann
Then
kommt
comes
der
the Day of
Gerichtstag oder
Judgment, or
Versöhnungstag,
the Day of
Yom
Atonement,
Kippur,
Yom
am
Kippur,
10.
on the 10th of
Tischri,
Tishri,
beziehungsweise
or
am
on
3.
October
Oktober.
3. Here is
Hier
the
ist das
7-day Feast of
siebentägige
Tabernacles.
Laubhüttenfest.
And as
Und wie im
already
letzten
shown
Video schon
in the
angezeigt,
last video,
ist hier
here
auch die
too
Zeit
is
des
the time of the
erwartenden
expected midnight cry,
Mitternachtsrufs
or
oder
its
dessen
event.
Ereignis.
At the
Am
end of
Ende
the
des
Feast of
Laubhüttenfests
Tabernacles
folgt
follows
der
the feast
Festtag
day Shemini
Shemini
Atzeret,
Atzeret,
which
der auch
is also
das
called the
Schlussfest genannt
concluding
wird, wo
feast,
den
where prayer
Spätregen
was
gebeten
made for the
wurde.
latter rain.
Ich denke, es ist
I think
passend
it's
zu
fitting to
sagen,
say
dass wir
that
uns
we would
wünschen
wish
würden,
the
dass
virgins
die
had
Jungfrauen
enough
genug
oil
Öl
for their
für ihre
lamps.
Lampen haben. Und
And
wer uns
whoever
kennt,
knows us
der weiß,
knows
dass
that we
damals
have
die
shared that at that
hochschwangere
time
Maria und
the
Josef
heavily
am
pregnant Mary
nächsten Tag
and
nach
Joseph
Shemini
began
Azaret
their journey
ihre
home the next
Heimreise
day after
angetreten
Shemini
haben.
Atzeret.
Und weil
And
die
because the
Herbergen
inns were
überfüllt
overcrowded,
waren,
they had to
mussten sie
spend
an
that
diesem
evening
Abend
in a
einem
stable.
Stall übernachten. Und so wissen
And
wir,
so we know
wann das
when the
wahre
true Christmas
Weihnachtsfest
feast
in diesem
will be
Jahr sein wird.
this year,
Am Abend
on the
des
evening of
16.
October
auf den
16
17.
to 17.
Oktober. Wie im
As
letzten
already
Video
mentioned in the
haben
last
weder
video,
die Juden noch
neither
die
the
Christen
Jews
das
nor the
gesamte
Christians
Verständnis
have the
des
full
wahren
understanding
Kalenders
of the
Gottes.
true calendar of
Deshalb
God.
lasst euch nicht
Therefore,
täuschen,
don't be
wenn ihr im
deceived when you
Internet
search for
nach
these
diesen
feast days
Festtagen
on the
sucht.
internet.
Im
On the
Zeitstrahl habe
timeline,
ich hier
I've drawn
eine
a trumpet
Posaune
here
für
for
den
the
ersten
first
Tag des
day
Monats
of the month
Tischri
Tishri,
eingezeichnet und
and a
einen
bar
Balken
for
für
the
die
autumn feasts
Herbstfeste
for the
der ersten
first
Möglichkeit.
possibility.
Und
And you
dasselbe
see the
sehen
same
wir hier
here for
für
the
die
autumn
Herbstfeste
feasts
der
of
zweiten
the second
Möglichkeit des
possibility
Monats Cheshvan.
in the month Cheshvan.
Ich denke, ihr könnt bereits
I think
unschwer
you
erkennen,
can already
dass
clearly
hier
see that
eine
quite
ziemlich
an important
wichtige
time
Zeit
lies
vor uns
ahead of
liegt.
us.
Und bedenkt bitte
And
auch,
please
dass
also keep in
Protestanten
mind
eigentlich
that
wissen,
Protestants
dass
normally
Jesus
should know that
buchstäblich
Jesus
die
literally fulfilled
Frühlingsfeste
the
erfüllte,
spring
als am
feasts when
Passetag
he was
gekreuzigt
crucified
wurde,
on
am
Passover
ersten
Day,
Tag der ungesäuerten
rested in the
Brote
grave
im
on the first
Grab
day of
ruhte
unleavened bread,
und am zweiten
and
Tag
rose
der
on the second
ungesäuerten
day
Brote,
of
also
unleavened
dann,
bread.
als
That
die
is, when the wave
Webegabe
sheaf
gewoben
was
wurde,
waved.
auferstand. Daher ist es
Therefore, it's
naheliegend,
obvious
dass
that
Jesu
Jesus' church at
Gemeinde
the
am
end
Ende
of
der Zeit
time
die
fulfills the autumn
Herbstfeste
feasts
in
in
gewisser
some
Form
form.
erfüllt.
So far,
Soweit
these
ein
were
paar
a few
einleitende,
introductory foundational
grundlegende
thoughts
Gedanken
as a
als
basis
Basis
for
für
the
die
further
weiteren Folgen.
slides.
Blicken
Let's
wir
look
noch
once
einmal
more
auf
at
die
the
sechste
sixth trumpet,
Posaune,
that
also auf
is,
das
at the
zweite
second
Reden.
woe.
Wir
We
müssen
must
noch
emphasize
einmal
once again
betonen,
that
dass
our
unsere
realization
Erkenntnis,
of
was
what
Three-Eye
3-Eye
Atlas
Atlas
wirklich
really
ist,
is
einfach
has
so
woken
gut
up
wie niemanden
practically no
bisher
one so
aufweckt.
far,
Weder
neither
kluge
wise
noch
nor foolish
törichte Jungfrau.
virgins.
Wir
We
sind
are,
gelinde
to put it
gesagt,
mildly,
verzweifelt.
desperate.
Die bereits
The
in den
distraction
vorigen
maneuvers
Videos
and
erklärten
smoke screens already
Ablenkungsmanöver
explained in the
und
previous
Smoke
videos
Screens bezogen
relating
auf
to
Feuerwerk
fire,
und
smoke,
Stiefel
and brimstone
setzen eher
affect
uns
us
zu, als ob
rather
eine
than wake up a
bemerkenswerte Menge
significant
an
number of
Leute
people.
aufwachen würde.
The Jubilee year is still unrecognized by mainstream so-called Christianity. The false influences of Judaism within Christianity continue practically unchecked, and Three-Eye Atlas is, for the world, anything possible, but not simply what God indicates with it. The throne censer from Revelation 8, together with the consequences that accompany it. One consequence is that Michael stood up and is already on his way to earth. That is, that the bridegroom is coming. The fact is, the widespread masses are asleep. This fact of being absolutely unheard caused Pastor John to sit down among us and reconsider the texts of the sixth trumpet, and thus the second woe, for which Three-Eye Atlas stands. One thing is certain: if no mighty wake-up event comes, as mentioned in the last video, the midnight cry, then the harvest at the end of the world will probably turn out meager. Could it be that the sixth trumpet, or the second woe, is not yet over? Could it be that the dying of a third of mankind, just as the text says, is not only to be seen spiritually, but that something literal is still to be expected, through which the sleeping virgins will wake up? Now, the complaint we've just made about the still sleeping condition of the 10 virgins must be found somewhere in the corresponding context in Revelation. If we, as the Church of Philadelphia, with the prophesied Elijah, are going through this experience right now, and that brought us to a better understanding of a verse we have so often tried to apply at the right time. Let's read here in Revelation 18, right where the fall of Babylon is described. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. We clearly see here that Babylon first pours out to the children of God, and then comes the payback, as one so fittingly says. Jesus gives a clear command here to his people: give double back to Babylon. This verse makes us understand that the interpretation of the text of the sixth trumpet, like we gave in the previous videos, must correspond to the part where we tried to expose the fiery, smoky, and brimstone-poisoned lies of Babylon, but entirely without success. Babylon, without knowing, filled to us when we fought against her on a spiritual level. That would mean that this second woe is not yet over, but goes into its physical second round, if you will. We only have to find out when that is. What we can already clearly see is that here the cup is visible, which is mentioned in the verse. We are definitely in the right place. And then Babylon must also be seen, who is a woman, a harlot. This actress in this context of Revelation 18 may also be found here. Let's continue reading in Revelation 18. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine. And she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. Here you see again the proud queen mentioned, who thinks that the tide would never turn, but she will receive her plagues, which will come in one day, that is, within 1 year. And we know this year, the 70th Jubilee year. And later in the text, 3 hours are mentioned, in which the fall happens within the day. So within the 70th Jubilee year, there are 3 special lunar months in which the fall of Babylon takes place. Here you see the 3 hours of the fall of Babylon, which logically must come after the blood moon. But now we must still find evidence why Babylon must expect the second round from this September 21 on. Or in other words, why from there the second woe becomes literal and terrible things are to be expected. Here you already see the very probable date of the event of the midnight cry from the last video. Around October 8 to 10, 2025, when the angel K1 stands in the sun and calls the birds of heaven to gather themselves for the supper of God. This info from timeanddate.com you already know. We have already used it for the hour and day of the text of the sixth trumpet. By applying the lunar eclipse or blood moon of March 14 for the hour and the solar eclipse of March 29 for the day. The sun was in Pisces on March 20th at the equinox point. It's a candlestick of the 2 witnesses. We've just experienced the next pair of lunar and solar eclipses with the blood moon on September 7 and the solar eclipse on September 21. Here the sun is at the equinox point in Virgo, the second candlestick, and this date coincides with our timeline from earlier and with the beginning of the 3 hours of Babylon. If that is so, then we must still find out when the 6th trumpet angel blew the trumpet and the voice from the golden altar of incense was heard. Let's read. And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. One thing is already clear. It must have been before March, and we have at most 2 places available on the Mazzaroth for God. In this case, God must be the Father himself, because the golden altar stands before the veil to the Most Holy, that is, before God the Father. And Jesus' true altar is there, where he sacrificed his life on Golgotha and gained the greatest victory. And at that very hour, in the year 31, the veil in the Most Holy was torn, exactly where the golden altar stood. The Father speaks in this case to his Son. But the Euphrates, at which the angels are bound, is K2 at Orion, which is connected through the galactic equator with the Father at the cross. Orion stands for the resurrected Jesus as high priest. At this time of the conversation, Jesus was still high priest and was offering incense at the golden altar in the third heaven. What now are these 4 heavenly bodies that are to be loosed in this time range? Here you see the Euphrates, represented by the path of K2. And here is the first angel, Jupiter, who crosses the Euphrates on May 2. The second angel is Mercury, and he crosses this Euphrates on June 6. Next, the Sun comes to the Euphrates on June 12. And Venus follows on July 27. And therefore, before this date, the hot phase 2 of the second woe can't come. Venus leaves the Euphrates region on August 1, and it's the last to cross the galactic equator. So at the latest, all 4 angels are released then. And this loosening takes place within the waiting time of the hour, day, month, and year, which brings us to September 21. By the way, did you know that in the Jewish calendar, there are 2 beginnings of the year? The religious year, or feast year, begins with the month Nisan, when one also looks for the barley to begin the biblical feast day count. So that is the beginning of the year in spring. And the civil or political year, or the agricultural year, begins half a year later, in the month Tishri. The first day of this month is the Day of Trumpets, and is called Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. One counted the years of a kingdom from this beginning of the year in autumn. So we have a blood moon and a solar eclipse at the beginning of the religious new year. And we have a blood moon and a solar eclipse at the beginning of the political year. That's rare. And if one considers that it must be in the 70th Jubilee year, then it is quite unique. Let's note it down. Here, the waiting time of the hour, day, month, and year ends. And after that must come the event that wakes up the virgins. From here on, the physical fire, smoke, and brimstone event is to be expected. Here is Rosh Hashanah, the political New Year. Once again, at the religious New Year, we had a moon and a solar eclipse, and at the political New Year, likewise. Up to this point, Babylon has filled unto us, and from here on, she gets double in the same cup. 3i Atlas is in Libra on September 21, where Jesus gives this command as the righteous judge, as the Son of Righteousness. In this regard, don't forget what Trump communicated to the world and also to the Church of God. At the same time, we published our last video, The Midnight Cry, on September 4. He not only declared war on Russia, China, North Korea, and so on, but also on Christ and on us
den Krieg
by
erklärt,
renaming the U.S. Department of Defense
Verteidigungsministerium
to the Department of War
Kriegsministerium
by
per
decree
Dekret am
on
5.
September 5.
umbenannt hat.
This act speaks for itself.
Bleiben wir gleich
Let's
bei
stay
Offenbarung
with Revelation
18
18
und schauen uns
and
den
look at
Report
the report
am
at the
Ende
end
jeder
of each
Stunde
hour.
an. Zuerst
First, the kings
lamentieren
of the
die
earth
Könige der Erde.
lament.
Das
That
könnte
could
ein
be a
starker
strong
Hinweis
hint
auf
at the
die
mighty
Mächtigen
ones in the
in
USA.
den USA sein.
Let's read.
Und
And the
es
kings
werden
of the
sie
earth,
beweinen und sich
who
ihre
have
Glieder
committed
an die Brust
fornication
schlagen,
and
die
lived
Könige der
deliciously
Erde,
with her,
die mit
shall
ihr
bewail
Unzucht
her
getrieben
and lament
und
for
üppig
her
gelebt
when
haben,
they shall
wenn
see
sie
the
den
smoke
Rauch
of her
ihrer
burning,
Feuersbrunst sehen.
standing
Und sie
afar
werden in der
off
Ferne stehen
for the
aus
fear
Furcht vor
of
ihrer
her
Qual und sagen,
torment, saying,
Wehe,
Alas,
wehe, du
alas,
große
that
Stadt
great
Babylon,
city,
du gewaltige
Babylon,
Stadt,
that
denn in
mighty
einer Stunde
city,
ist dein
for in
Gericht
1 hour
gekommen.
is thy judgment come.
Was auch
Who
immer
knows what this
dieser
smoke of
Rauch
her
ihrer
burning will be,
Feuersbrunst sein
but
wird. Aber
it
das
doesn't
sieht
look good.
nicht gut aus.
You
Wir
see
sehen,
that
dass
this
dieses
event
Ereignis
coincides
mit dem
with the
Schlachten
slaughter
in der
in the
6.
sixth
Posaune
trumpet,
beziehungsweise
or
dem
the
2.
second
Krieg
woe.
zusammenfällt.
With
Damit beginnt
this
das
begins the double payback
Doppel-Zurückgeben
of
von
literal
buchstäblichem
fire,
Feuer,
smoke,
Rauch und
and
Schwefel.
brimstone,
Und
and
das
that
direkt
directly
bei
on
der
the
Hure
harlot Babylon
Babylons
in
in
this
diesem
context.
Kontext. Also
So
hier
here
bei
upon
der
the
Frau,
woman
die als
who
Königin
sits
thront
as
und meint,
queen
ihr
and
geschieht
thinks no
kein Übel.
evil will come to her.
Schaut, wer das Feuer
Look
und
who
den
brings
Rauch
the
bringt.
fire and the
Hier ist
smoke.
die Sonne
Here
für das
is the
Feuer
sun for
und
the
hier
fire,
ist
and
Dreiecke
here is
Atlas
Three-Eye
für den
Atlas
Rauch
for the
als
smoke as the
Räucherfass am
censer on
21.
October 21.
Freunde, das
Friends,
schaut
that does
nicht
not
gut
look
aus
good.
und das
And that
ist der
is the
Report
report
am
at the
Ende
end
der
of the
ersten
first hour.
Stunde. Und in dieser
And in this
ersten Stunde
first
wird
hour,
sich entscheiden,
it will be
wer zu
decided
den
who
klugen
will belong
und
to the
törichten
wise
Jungfrauen
and the foolish
gehören wird.
virgins.
Als nächstes
Next, the
lamentieren
merchants
die
of the earth
Kaufleute der Erde.
lament.
Lesen
Let's
wir.
read.
Und
And
die
the merchants
Kaufleute
of the
der Erde
earth
weinen
shall
und
weep
trauern
and
über
mourn
sie,
over
weil
her,
niemand mehr
for
ihre
no man
Ware
buyeth
kauft.
their merchandise
Dann
anymore.
sind
Then
allerlei
all
Waren
sorts of
angeführt
goods
in den
are
Versen
listed
12
in
bis
verses
14.
12 to
Lest
14.
es für euch
Please
selbst.
read it for yourselves.
Die
The
Verkäufer
merchants
dieser
of
Ware,
these
die
things,
ihr reich
which were
geworden
made
sind,
rich by her,
werden aus
shall
Furcht
stand
ihrer
afar off
Qual
for the
von
fear
fern
of her
stehen.
torment,
Sie werden
weeping
weinen
and
und trauern
wailing,
und
and
sagen,
saying, Alas,
wehe, wehe,
alas,
die
that
große
great
Stadt,
city,
die
that
bekleidet
was
war mit
clothed
feiner
in fine
Leinwand
linen,
und Purpur
and
und
purple,
Scharlach
and
und
scarlet,
übergossen
and
mit
decked
Gold
with
und
gold,
edlen
and
Steinen
precious
und Perlen.
stones and pearls.
Denn in einer
For in
Stunde
1
wurde
hour so
dieser
great
so große
riches
Reichtum
is come
verwüstet.
to naught.
Welche
Which
Konstellation
constellation on the
am
Mazzaroth
ist die einzige,
is the only
die
one
diese
that can
Stunde der
represent this
Händler
hour
und
of the
Kaufleute
merchants and
repräsentieren kann?
traders?
Wohl
Surely
nur
only
die
Libra,
Waage, die
which
jeder
every
Kaufmann
merchant
haben
must
muss,
have
die
in
Güter
order to weigh
abzuwägen.
the goods.
Hier wird dieser
Here,
Report
this
am
report is
Ende der
given
zweiten
at the
Stunde
end
gegeben
of the
und es
second
besteht
hour,
überhaupt kein
and
Zweifel,
there is
dass wir
absolutely no
hier
doubt
am
that we are at
richtigen
the
Ort
right
sind.
place here.
Zum Schluss
Finally,
lamentieren
the
die Kapitäne,
captains and
Schiffsleute,
seamen
die
who
am
work
Meer
at sea
arbeiten.
lament.
Meer könnte sich
Sea
auf
could
Europa
refer to
beziehen.
Europe.
Lesen wir.
Let's read.
Und jeder
And
Kapitän,
every
die ganze
shipmaster,
Menge derer,
and all
die
the
auf dem
company
Schiff
in
sind,
ships, and
die
sailors,
Matrosen und
and as
alle,
many
die
as
auf
trade
dem
by
Meer
sea, stood
arbeiten,
afar off, and
standen
cried
von
when they
Ferne
saw
und
the
riefen,
smoke
als sie
of
den
her
Rauch
burning,
ihrer
saying,
Feuersbrunst sahen,
What
wer war
city
der
is
große
like
Stadt
unto
wert?
this great city?
Und sie warfen
And they
Staub
cast
auf ihre
dust on
Häupter
their
und
heads,
riefen
and
weinend
cried,
und trauernd,
weeping and wailing,
wehe,
saying,
wehe, die
Alas,
große
alas,
Stadt,
that great
in
city,
der alle,
wherein
die
were
Schiffe
made
auf dem Meer
rich all
hatten,
that had
reich
ships in the
gemacht
sea
wurden
by
durch ihren
reason
Wohlstand.
of her
Denn
costliness.
in
For
einer
in 1
Stunde
hour
ist sie
is she
verwüstet
made desolate.
worden. Das ist
That's
der
the
Report
report
am
at the
Ende
end
der
of the
dritten
third
Stunde.
hour. And where did the third hour take place?
beim
At the
ersten
first
Tier, dem
beast,
Papsttum
the papacy,
und dessen
and its
Reittier.
mount. That is,
Also zum
for
Beispiel
example, the
die Nationen
nations of
Europas
Europe
oder
or
die
the
Vereinten
United
Nationen.
Nations.
Was
What
folgt
follows
danach
afterwards
in
in
Offenbarung
Revelation
18?
18?
Das
The
Gleichnis
parable
mit dem
with
Müllstein,
the
das ich im
millstone,
letzten
which
Video schon
I
verwendet
already
habe,
used in
sowie
the
der
last
Blutmond
video.
vom
Just
7.
as the blood moon
September
of
als
September 7 was
Vorausschatten
thrown
vom
into the
starken
sea
Engel
of the
Wassermann
mighty
ins Meer
angel
geworfen
Aquarius
wurde,
as
so
a
wird es
foreshadowing,
tatsächlich
so
während
it will actually
diesen
happen
3
during
Stunden
these 3
geschehen.
hours.
Und wir
And
wissen
we
bereits,
already know
was
what will
nach
happen
diesen 3
after these
Stunden
3
geschehen wird.
hours.
Die Stimme
The
von
voice of the
Bräutigam und
bridegroom
Braut
and bride
wird
will
nicht
not
mehr
be
gehört,
heard anymore,
weil vom
because
17.
from December
bis zum
17 to
21.
21,
Dezember
during
während der
the
ersten
first
5
5
Tage
days
von
of
Hanukkah
Hanukkah,
die erste
the first
Auferstehung und die
resurrection
Himmelfahrt
and the
aller
ascension
Geliebten
of all the
stattfinden
righteous
wird.
will take place.
Wenn wir
If
schon
we
von
are speaking
Kapitänen
of
und
captains
Schiffen
and ships
an
at this
diesem
point in
Punkt in der
time,
Zeit sprechen, dann
then
ist
there
hier
is also
beim
a sea
Kreuz
here at
auch
the
ein Bild,
cross,
nämlich der
namely the
galaktische
galactic
Äquator,
equator,
das
the great
große
sea
Meer des
of
Himmels,
heaven,
das viele
which
Menschen
many
in der Nacht
people marvel
bestaunen.
at
Und
during
auf
the night.
diesem Meer steht
And on
das
this
Schiff
sea, the ship Argo
Argo
Navis
Navis
is
bereit,
ready,
die
the
Arche,
ark, to
all
bring
jene,
home
die
all
Jesu
those
Opfer
who have
angenommen
accepted
haben
Jesus'
und genug Öl
sacrifice
haben,
and have enough
heimzubringen,
oil,
und zwar
namely
Richtung
in the direction
Orion.
of Orion.
Einer der
One
wichtigsten
of the
Verse
most
in
important
Offenbarung
verses
18,
in
wenn man
Revelation
all
18,
das bisher
if one knows
vorgestellte
all
weiß,
that has been
ist
presented so
wohl
far,
eine der
is probably one
direktesten
of the most
Warnungen
direct
Jesus
warnings
selbst.
of Jesus himself.
Und ich
And I
hörte
heard
eine
another
andere Stimme
voice
aus
from
dem
heaven
Himmel, die
saying,
sprach:
Come
Geht
out
hinaus
of her,
aus
my
ihr,
people,
mein Volk,
that
damit
ye
ihr
be
nicht
not
ihrer
partakers
Sünden
of her
teilhaftig
sins,
werdet und
and
damit
that ye
ihr
receive
nicht
not
von
of her
ihren Plagen
plagues.
empfangt. Denn
For
ihre
her sins
Sünden
have
reichen
reached
bis
unto
zum
heaven,
Himmel, und
and
Gott
God
hat
hath
ihrer
remembered her
Ungerechtigkeiten
iniquities.
gedacht.
This,
Die wohl
which
letzte
is
Warnung
probably
ergeht
the
an
last
alle
warning,
seine Kinder,
goes out to
besonders
all
jene
his children,
in der
especially
Gemeinde der
those in the Seventh-day
Seventh-day
Adventist Church.
Die
The Orion
Orion
message
in
in 2010
2010
and
und
other
weitere
groundbreaking
wegweisende
foundational
Basisstudien
studies
wurden von
were given
Bruder
by
John
Brother John
speziell an
specifically
diese
to this
Gemeinde
church.
gegeben. Aber
But
dieses
this
Licht
light
von
from
Gott
God
wurde
was
beharrlich
persistently
während
rejected
den
during
vergangenen
the last
15 Jahren
15
abgelehnt.
years.
Nun
Now
macht Gott
God is
ernst.
serious.
Wie gesagt,
As already
ihr
said,
wisst, wo
you
die
know
Stimme
where the
Gottes
voice of
vom
God
Himmel
is
her
heard from
gehört wird,
heaven,
wo
where
die
the harpists
Harfenspieler
of
der Offenbarung
Revelation
auf
harp
ihren
on their
Harfen
harps.
harfen.
Please
Verlasst
leave
bitte
the Babylonian
raschest
churches
die
quickly
babylonischen Gemeinden,
before they
bevor
actually
jene
receive the plagues
tatsächlich die
of
Plagen
Babylon.
Babylons erhalten.
The day
Einmal
will come
kommt der Tag,
when
wo
God
Gott
will
tut,
do
was
what he
angekündigt
has
hat. Und nun
announced.
wisst ihr
And now
ziemlich
you
exakt,
know almost exactly
wann
when
diese
this
Zeit
time,
gemäß
according
unserem
to our current
aktuellen
understanding,
Verständnisses
begins.
beginnt. Und
Let's
untermauern wir
reinforce
noch
what
das
we've learned
Erlernte,
by
indem wir
taking a
einen
brief
kurzen
look
Blick auf
at
die
the
Texte
texts
der
of the
7.
seventh
Plage
plague,
werfen, die
which
sich
are to be
ja am
fulfilled
19.
from August
August
19
erfüllen
on.
sollen. Lesen wir nun
Let's read
den
now
ersten
the
Text
first
der
text
7.
of the
Plage.
seventh plague.
Und der
And the
7.
seventh
goss
angel
seine
poured
Schale
out his
aus
vial
in die
into
Luft.
the air.
Ihr
You
erinnert euch,
remember that
dass
Jupiter
Jupiter
is a
Gasplanet
gas
ist und
planet
damit für
and
die
thus
Luft
stands
steht.
for the air.
Ruach,
Ruach,
der
the
Odem
breath
des
of
Lebens.
life. And
Und just
precisely
in
in
dieser
this last
letzten
plague,
Plage
the
wird dieser
spirit of
Geist
life
des
will
Lebens
be
von
increasingly
den
taken away from the
Unbußfertigen
impenitent,
immer
because
mehr
the Holy
weggenommen,
Spirit is
weil sich der
continually
Heilige Geist
withdrawing
immer
from
mehr von
this
dieser Erde
earth,
zurückzieht
and
und der
peace
Friede
is more and
immer
more
mehr und
being
mehr
taken away.
hinweggenommen wird.
The moon bowl must therefore be poured out over Jupiter, as we see in the picture. That is the evening of August 19, Paraguay time. And in Israel, it was already August 20. And look at the news that came exactly on that day. Israel began the offensive Gideon's Chariot against Gaza City because in the morning of August 20, clashes with Hamas occurred. As you know, this offensive is still ongoing and is expanding almost uncontrollably because on September 9, Israel even attacked the capital of Qatar, supposedly to eliminate Hamas leaders. If that is not a bombastic beginning of the seventh plague, then I don't know what is. In the last video, we tried to show where this playing with fire of Judaism can lead, and very probably will lead. Let's read further in the plague text. And there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven, from the throne, saying, "It is done." Here in Leo, at the sickle on August 23, we have the great voice which normally the sun provides. It declares, "It is done." And the moon, our fast clock hand, is also there. It's truly a remarkable moment in the course of prophecy. What could have happened here? Before Jesus gave his sacrifice and was taken up into heaven, he promised something. Let's read. "Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also." So if the mansions are prepared, then Jesus comes again to take us to him. And now the question to those who believe what we have been proclaiming for weeks and months: is Jesus on his way to earth? Yes, definitely, but only for those who believe. The throne censer is the proof of the end of his high priestly ministry in heaven. So we learn that, most probably, the mansions in the holy city are prepared. That's indeed fantastic news for God's children. I say it right away. When the virgins will have woken up, then there will be a sermon about the bride of God, who, according to Revelation, is the holy city. Where is the holy city at present? And what does it mean when she will clothe herself in pure and fine linen? That and more will be a huge revelation for many of you. Let's put into the timeline what we know so far. Here you see the two parts of verse 17 in the timeline. I would also like to draw your attention to the blood moon as we read the next verse of the seventh plague, for now it becomes turbulent. Let's read verse 18 of the seventh plague. "And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake, and so great." The next marker on the timeline, which sun and moon reach, is the equinox point in Virgo on September 21, after the blood moon. You see it here in the picture. Mars is also in Virgo, and Mars stands for war, or persecution, or bloodshed. It looks as if, at the earliest after the blood moon of September 7, but quite surely from September 21 on, something terrible must happen. Here we read of the greatest earthquake that ever was and ever will be. And whatever it may be, it will fully bring forth God's wrath. Presumably, it is not a literal earthquake, but it likely points to the prophetic earth, the USA. Be prepared in these days for quite something. It will most probably be the sudden destruction that follows supposed peace efforts. Look, the 80th UN General Assembly began meeting on September 9, and from September 23 to 28, the general debate takes place. That's between the beginning of the first hour of Babylon's fall and the midnight cry. Perhaps the dreaded Third World War will break out with fatal consequences. For through that, the earth would also be physically completely corrupted, and God would not let that go unpunished. Perhaps God also allows natural catastrophes. I think of Campi Flagre or Yellowstone. Once again, we know the time pretty precisely, but concerning the corresponding events, we can only speculate. Nevertheless, flee from Babylon, whoever is still in it. But please, quickly, for the time has become short. Let's read the next part of the seventh plague. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. The great city is Babylon the Great, the harlot Babylon, whom I have this time not clothed in white, but in red. 3 parts would be visible here: the head, the trunk, and the feet. But these 3 parts can also be seen in another way. 1 part in the woman herself, the 2nd part in Libra, and the 3rd part in Ophiuchus or Scorpius. And that also coincides with the 3 hours of Babylon's fall in the timeline. In short, something is described here that must come because of or after the terrible earthquake. And that also goes along with the dying of 1/3 of mankind through fire, smoke, and brimstone from the second woe event. The cup of the wine of God's wrath is directly mentioned here. This verse must be applied here. The 7th plague contains the ultimate wine of his wrath, as is easily recognized. Here it is also especially mentioned that God remembers Babylon. And therefore, from this particular September 21 on, it is legitimate, and indeed the only right thing, to arrange the 3 hours of Babylon's fall exactly there where the cup is. Let's draw the time markers of these 2 verses into the timeline again. Here we see the 2 verses, 18 and 19, and the period of the general debate of the UN in the timeline. I think it is unmistakably recognizable that here is a very hot time. May the Lord awaken his children, and moreover preserve them. May he grant them after these days open ears for the midnight cry message. Let's take another look at the last verses of the seventh plague. The next plague verse reads, "And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found." Islands and mountains we have applied for Nevis, where Brother John stayed, and for our place here in Paraguay, because the Cordillera district here in Paraguay means mountains. But mountains and islands also stand for the remote regions of the last saints, who fled before the mark, the image, and the number of the beast. They are the last places of refuge, or house churches, that did not bow their knees to Baal. They are those who have separated themselves. "Come out of her, my people," Jesus said. They are the 5 wise virgins who, from the cornerstone laying day on December 16, will be blessed, because during the next 5 Hanukkah days, they will be caught up to meet the Lord. I think it is clear where this verse must be placed. Let's look also at the last, unfortunately very sad verse. "And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. And men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, for the plague thereof was exceeding great." This hail will fall upon those who were not part of the first resurrection and ascension. And these are the stones before which, at the end of the 6th seal text, all will hide themselves in the bunkers and mountains. Here in the text, it no longer says, "They repented not," but here there is only blaspheming. It has become clear that the second coming of Jesus has taken place. And with that, the Carmel challenge of the prophesied Elijah is truly answered with fire from heaven. Thus, the wavering back and forth is over. For whoever will be part of the first resurrection stands on the Lord's side. And whoever still wavers and has bought oil from other merchants will be judged by the fire from heaven that comes from God. The door will be shut, and Jesus will say to the 5 foolish virgins, "I know you not." Don't forget that December 19, 2025 is the closest point of 3i Atlas to Earth. The second woe will be ended in those days, in December. And whoever has survived the second woe and has not departed will have to suffer the hail from God. And that is also the treading of the winepress after the holy city has departed. But this topic of the 2 harvests in Revelation 14 will be part of the Midnight Cry sermon. Let's complete the timeline. Here we see the 2 verses, 20 and 21. I think with that, the timeline has been filled with some important and striking events, and it should not be difficult to go prepared into the coming time. We call upon you again to help, to cooperate, to remain steadfast, so that the Lord may bring in a rich harvest. And please think carefully about how you can survive the weeks and months of the fall of Babylon. There will also be a financial collapse. Do you have, in this respect, the right oil? That is, the right means in store? Please help to build the end-time ark and share this video wherever you can. Warn wherever you can before the 3 hours of Babylon's fall begin. God be with you. Amen.